Okay, let's dive in. We have quite the collection of sources in front of us today, just
It
monumental.
really is. We're looking at thousands of years of thought here.
Yeah, from Aristotle and Cicero, ancient Greece and Rome, then zooming through thinkers like Rousseau.
Right up to modern folks, business leaders, data gurus like Taleb, even Navy SEAL commanders sharing their insights.
It's a huge sweep across time, across disciplines, software development, political theory, military strategy.
But there's a core thread, isn't there? We're digging into this enduring challenge. What actually makes for effective leadership? How do you build things, communities, organizations that last?
Exactly. And how do you maintain sort of moral authority when things get messy and complex? Which they always do.
That's the mission for this deep dive, right? To sift through all this, find those common principles.
Yeah, not just surface level tips, but the real bedrock stuff. What holds true whether you're talking about ancient Athens or a startup today?
And how do those classic ideas hold up against, the sheer noise and chaos of the modern world, especially with information flying everywhere? Let's try and cut through that noise.
Okay, so foundations first. Where do we start for stability?
You pretty much have to start with Aristotle. Okay. He was focused on what makes a system of governance actually survive, not just what looks perfect on paper.
Right. Survival over theoretical purity. And he had this really key insight about moderation, didn't he?
He did. It's almost counterintuitive. He argues that the real strength, the virtue that helps a constitution endure, isn't pushing its main idea like democracy or oligarchy to the
Wow.
absolute extreme.
So if you're a democracy, you don't go for absolutely total equality in every single respect.
Exactly, because that can apparently lead to chaos.
Yeah.
And if you're an oligarchy, ruled by the few wealthy.
You don't just concentrate all power and wealth maximally in their hands.
Right, because pushing any system to its extreme tends to make it brittle, internally fragile. It ends up excluding too many people, creating instability.
It's about inclusivity and the common benefit then. Not just as a nice idea, but as a survival tactic for the system itself.
Precisely. His example with the oligarchy really nails this.
Tell us about that.
Well, he says, okay, in an oligarchy, justice means offices are distributed based on wealth. That's the system's logic.
Sure, that fits the definition.
But, he adds, that oligarchy will only survive if, and this is the key part, the multitude of those who want the Constitution is stronger than the multitude of those who do not.
Ah, okay. So the wealthy elite running things have to govern in a way that the non-wealthy majority still feel they benefit enough from the system.
That they don't actively want to tear it down, even if they aren't holding the top jobs themselves.
So the elite have to temper their own self-interests to preserve the very system that protects their position. It's pure pragmatism.
The ultimate pragmatic calculation for keeping things stable long term. And it connects to another point he makes about unity.
He pushes back against too much unity.
Right. Yeah, he says a city-state isn't meant to be a perfectly unified thing, like a single organism if you push it too far. Because what preserves something is what's good for it.
And forced unity, maybe forced homogeneity, actually undermines what makes a city work.
It seems so. A city arises when the population is big enough and diverse enough to be self-sufficient, to have everything it needs within itself. Trying to make it too unified could damage that self-sufficiency, make it less resilient.
So you need a certain amount of, let's say, healthy diversity or even friction for it to function properly and sustain itself.
That seems to be the idea. Self-sufficiency is the goal. Now, if we jump way forward, like 2 millennia.
To Rousseau.
Yeah, Rousseau. He's grappling with a related, but maybe even more fundamental question. How do you even figure out the best rules for a society in the first place?
Right, given that humans are, well, human, full of passion, self-interest, not always thinking long-term.
Exactly. He recognized that figuring out the ideal rules is incredibly hard for any normal person, especially someone involved in politics.
So he posits this need for a kind of superior intelligence.
Yeah, someone almost mythical, really, who could see all of human nature, all the passions, but somehow not have any of them. Perfectly objective. Able to design the perfect system without bias.
Which obviously doesn't exist in the real world.
Right. So since actual societies are run by flawed people, Rousseau saw the need for a mechanism within the system to keep things on track, to correct imbalances.
And that's where he introduces the tribunes.
Yes, the tribunes are fascinating.
Oh.
He's very clear. They aren't part of the executive branch. They aren't the sovereign will of the people. They aren't the people themselves. They're separate.
A special entity. What's their job?
Their job is specifically to correct disproportions in the government, to act as kind of mediating force.
Like a go-between.
Exactly. Connecting the prince, or the executive power, with the people, or connecting the prince with the sovereign, the collective will. They try to keep the different parts of the government in balance.
So, thinking about today, would that be something like a constitutional court? Or maybe an independent oversight body? Something that checks power without wielding executive power itself?
That's a really good modern parallel. Yes. Their power is meant to be corrective, preventative, based on law or moral authority, not brute force. They stop one part getting too strong and breaking the whole thing.
Okay, so we have Aristotle on stability through moderation, Rousseau on the ideal lawgiver and the need for corrective mechanisms. Where does Cicero fit in?
Cicero, coming from the Roman tradition, provides a crucial moral foundation for the kind of stability Aristotle and Rousseau are thinking about.
He starts with what makes humans different, right? Reason.
Cicero, the defining gap between humans and animals is reason, and it's not just calculation ability.
It's more than that.
It's the ability to see consequences, connect past, present, and future, and critically, to engage in society, in mutual interaction. Reason is what makes complex society possible.
And that capacity for reason underpins his famous ethical stance.
Which is incredibly strong. He basically says expediency and immorality cannot exist in the same action.
That flies in the face of a lot of modern thinking, or at least modern practice. The idea of the necessary evil or the tough, slightly dirty choice for the greater good.
Cicero completely rejects that. He argues that nothing is more contrary to our fundamental nature, our rational social nature, than immorality. Therefore, if something is truly right, aligned with nature, it must be expedient in the truest, longest-term sense.
So if you think you need to do something immoral for a short-term gain,
Cicero would say you've miscalculated. You haven't grasped the real long-term cost of that immoral act. True self-interest, true expediency always aligns with doing what's right.
it really flips the usual way of thinking. We assume expedient often means cutting moral corners. He says if you're cutting moral corners, it's not truly expedient.
Exactly. And this moral foundation connects directly to his view on the purpose of the state.
Which was surprisingly pragmatic.
Very pragmatic. He argued that the main reason states were established in the first place was to secure the undisturbed possession of private property.
So protecting people's stuff was job number one.
Fundamentally. And therefore, the primary duty of those governing is to protect every person in the possession of what rightfully belongs to them. It puts protecting individual rights and ensuring economic stability right at the heart of why government exists.
It grounds that abstract idea of stability in something very concrete, protecting the citizens' material well-being and rights.
That's the deal, essentially. The government gets its power, and in return, it fulfills this basic contract. If it fails, it loses legitimacy and risks that instability Aristotle was warning about.
Okay, so we've got these foundations. Moderation, checks and balances, moral alignment, protecting rights. Now let's shift to the individual leader operating in that kind of environment. Emerson seems like a good place to start.
Definitely. Ralph Waldo Emerson takes a radically inward turn. It's all about self-reliance.
That famous quote, "Rely on your own poverty more than on another's wealth." What does he really mean by poverty there?
It's not just about money. It's about relying on your own core, your inner resources, your virtue, almost like an inner poverty of needing nothing external, rather than relying on external validation, connections, or the wealth of others' opinions or power.
Relying on your own true self, your own integrity.
Precisely. And when someone does that, Emerson says, they become the conscience of the society. They align themselves with what's just and true.
I love his image for this. They're like transparent objects between observers and the sun.
It's such a powerful metaphor, isn't it? They don't cast their own shadow. They don't block the light. They don't distort reality with their ego. You see the truth through them. Their transparency is their power.
And this inner clarity dictates how they view actions and results.
Absolutely. He draws a sharp line between what he calls the feeble soul and the hero.
The feeble soul focuses on
the profit or hurt of an action. They're obsessed with the consequences, the outcome. Did I win? Did I lose? What's in it for me?
Where's the hero?
The hero sees the event, the outcome, as ancillary.
Ancillary. That's a key word, meaning secondary, subordinate.
Exactly. The outcome is just a side effect, almost. It's a servant to the quality and integrity of the action itself. The action, aligned with truth and justice, is primary. The outcome has to follow that.
Okay, let's make that concrete for people listening. If you're, say, a leader, and your only goal is win the next vote, hit the quarterly target, whatever the event is.
Emerson would likely call that feeble. You're driven by the consequence.
But if your focus is on acting rightly, making the just decision, pursuing the true course, and you believe the win or the success will naturally follow from that integrity?
Then you're operating like the hero. The outcome must follow you and your principled action, not the other way around. You don't chase the result chases your character.
It's a demanding standard. Act rightly, and let the chips fall where they may, because they should fall correctly if the action was right.
That's the essence of it. But maintaining that pure internal signal, that reliance on truth, well, that runs headlong into the challenges of the modern world, which brings us, inevitably, to someone like Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Right. Taleb focusing on randomness, data, and how easily we get fooled. He warns about confusing epiphenomena with real signals.
Yeah, epiphenomena, it sounds complex, but it's basically those fake patterns, those spurious relationships you find in data, especially big data.
They look real, but they're just noise.
Pretty much. And here's Taleb's crucial point for anyone looking at data today, whether in business, science, policy. In large data sets, any big swings, any large deviations are far more likely to be caused by random noise, by variance, than by some actual underlying cause or signal you think you found.
So the irony is, the more data we have, the easier it is to find these misleading patterns, because there's just more random fluctuation happening.
Exactly. The noise gets amplified, and these random correlations can look incredibly convincing. Think about a business example.
Okay.
Say a company sees a huge jump in sales. One quarter, a big deviation. And analysts might immediately point to, say, a new ad campaign they launched. That's the apparent signal.
Makes sense. Cause and effect.
But Taleb would caution. Given all the complex random factors in the market, maybe a competitor had a sudden problem, maybe there was a weird supply chain fluke, it's statistically more likely that the sales jump was just random noise, not directly caused by that specific ad campaign.
And the danger is building a whole strategy assuming the ad campaign was the magic bullet, when it might have been pure luck.
Precisely. You end up chasing ghosts in the data. And this gets worse because of what Taleb calls the researcher's free option.
The free option, what's that?
It's the subtle temptation, or maybe the unconscious bias, to just stop analyzing the data once you find something that confirms what you already believed or hoped to find.
Ah, so you run the numbers, you find one chart that supports your preferred plan, and you go, great, found it. And you don't keep digging.
And you conveniently ignore or don't even look for the rest of the data that might contradict it or show is just a fluke.
That's a killer for Emerson's transparent hero. Right, if you're supposed to be seeking truth, but you're actually just cherry-picking data to confirm your bias.
It completely undermines the process. It turns data analysis, which sounds objective, into just another form of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
You're using the noise to justify your pre-existing belief, drowning out any genuine, potentially inconvenient signal.
Wow. Okay, so integrity in the face of data is crucial. Taleb also applies this idea of subtraction, or maybe invisibility, to technology itself.
Yeah, he has this interesting take. He suggests technology is often at its best when it becomes invisible, when it just works seamlessly in the background.
And especially when it replaces something that came before it that was clunky, fragile, or unnatural.
Right. We often think of tech progress as adding more stuff, more features, more gadgets, more complexity. But Taleb highlights the value of subtraction. When technology removes a source of fragility or friction.
Like his example of the internet.
Exactly. He argues that the internet, for all its own complexities, disrupted the top-down, centralized, and ultimately fragile control of information held by states, big corporations, traditional media. It displaced a rigid system.
And the other example he gives is bureaucracy becoming less painful because of less paperwork.
Yeah, think about online forms versus standing in line with multiple carbon copies. The technology isn't great because it's flashy. It's great because it removes hassle, removes fragility, removes something deleterious. It's progress through subtraction.
Okay, so this need for truth, for avoiding self-deception, whether through data or ego, needs to be built into organizations, which leads us to something like Pixar's brain trust model.
Yes, the brain trust is a fantastic real-world example of trying to institutionalize radical candor, especially in a creative field where egos can be massive.
Let's break down how it works. It sounds intense. You mentioned the key ingredients are frank talk, debate, even laughter and love.
Yeah, the love part is crucial. It's this underlying trust that everyone in the room shares the same goal, making the film great. The criticism isn't personal, it's about the work.
But the absolute top priority, overriding politeness or hierarchy, is excavate the truth.
That's the mandate. Everyone, directors, writers, story artists, gathers to watch the current version of a film, often when it's still messy and broken. And they have to give honest, direct feedback. No pulling punches.
And the most striking rule, the one that really shows their commitment, was about Steve Jobs.
Absolutely. They had a mutually agreed rule. Steve Jobs, the CEO, the legendary founder, was not allowed in brain trust meetings.
Wow. Why? You'd think his input would be valuable.
Because, as they put it, his bigger-than-life presence would make it harder to be candid. People might defer to him or be afraid to disagree or try too hard to impress him.
So his very status, his power, would pollute the environment needed for brutal honesty.
Exactly. They literally prioritize the candor of the group over the potential contribution of the most powerful person in the company.
Yeah.
That's a serious commitment to truth-finding.
It really is. And that kind of candid, sometimes external perspective can unlock huge breakthroughs, like the example with Wall-E.
Oh yeah, the Wall-E ending. Originally, the story had Wall-E saving Eve. It worked, logically.
She seemed fine.
Yeah. But Brad Bird, another brilliant director at Pixar, came in with that outside brain trust perspective and said something like, wait a minute, you've built up this whole story about Eve finding her directive, her purpose, which is linked to Wall-E. You're denying the audience the moment they're waiting for.
Which was
Eve fulfilling her purpose by saving Wall-E, returning the affection, completing her arc.
the emotional payoff. It's so easy for the team living with the story day in, day out to miss that essential beat.
Totally. And that one piece of candid feedback led them to rewrite the ending, creating that incredibly powerful emotional moment the audience connected with. Candor delivered the emotional truth the story needed.
Amazing. Now, shifting from creative truth to more strategic organizational truth, Ray Dalio at Bridgewater seems to advocate a similar level of transparency.
Very similar principle, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when dealing with uncertainty. Dalio talks about this situation where they were thinking about spinning off a back office team.
Which would obviously create a lot of anxiety and questions for that team.
Huge anxiety.
Yeah.
The typical management playbook would be keep it secret, figure everything out behind closed doors, and then announce the final decision to minimize disruption.
Sounds logical. Less time for people to worry.
But Dalio took the opposite approach. They were immediately truthfully open about the fact that they were exploring this spin-off, even though they didn't have answers yet. They admitted the uncertainty.
Why do that? Wasn't it incredibly unsettling for the employees?
It probably was unsettling, but Dalio's logic was that the rumors and speculation that inevitably fill an information vacuum are always far worse, more damaging, and more fear-inducing than the actual, even if uncertain, truth.
So being transparent, even about ambiguity, prevents the rumor mill from creating something much scarier than reality. It manages the narrative and, crucially, preserves trust.
Exactly. You treat people like adults who can handle complexity. That vacuum of silence is toxic. And this focus on trust and internal health, it reminds me of Patrick Lencioni's work, too.
Right. Lencioni, with his focus on team dysfunction, he uses that parable, that story about the fictional CEO, Catherine.
Yeah, Catherine takes over this company that's really struggling. And her first move is completely counterintuitive to most results-driven executives.
She doesn't immediately slash budgets or rejig the sales strategy.
Nope. Her absolute first priority is tackling the dysfunction within her executive team, building coherence, trust, and the ability for them to have healthy conflict.
Why start there when the business results are tanking?
Because she fundamentally believes, and Lencioni argues, that you cannot achieve sustainable external success if the leadership team is internally broken. If they don't trust each other, if they avoid conflict, if they aren't aligned, they simply can't solve the complex business problems effectively.
So fix the internal team dynamics first, build that stable platform, and then tackle the external strategy and execution. It's almost Aristotelian. Get the internal structure right before you try to achieve external goals.
That's a great way to put it. Structural health precedes strategic success, and achieving that kind of health and alignment often requires clear goals, which brings us to OKRs.
Objectives and key results. A popular goal-setting framework.
Right. And when done well, OKRs are powerful. They provide focus, they align everyone's efforts, they connect individual contributions to the bigger picture, and they can actually foster autonomy because people know what they're aiming for.
But you flagged a potential pitfall, a red flag during implementation.
Yeah, a huge one we saw discussed is when the CEO says something like, oh, all my goals are just team goals.
That sounds collaborative, maybe even humble. What's wrong with that?
It sounds good, but it can often be an abdication of leadership modeling. It's a way for the CEO to avoid committing to specific, personal, measurable results for the things only they can influence or achieve.
So they're setting expectations for everyone else, but not demonstrating their own personal accountability within the same system.
Precisely. If the leader doesn't publicly own their own OKRs, showing what focus and accountability look like at the very top, why should anyone else take the system seriously? It undermines the whole effort.
It's the difference between assigning accountability and demonstrating it. Leadership has to model the behavior they expect.
Okay, so foundation's stable, truth is sought, goals are aligned. Now we need to execute. And the military, particularly elite units like the Navy SEALs, offer some hard-won lessons on leadership during execution.
Right. They talk a lot about the leader's physical positioning, metaphorically and literally, finding that right balance.
Exactly. It's about managing proximity. The leader generally needs to be positioned with the main body of the team, but remain mobile, able to move quickly to wherever they're most needed to make a decision or influence the action.
Without getting bogged down.
That's the key danger. They identified two major mistakes. First, getting sucked into every room clearance.
Meaning
Meaning the leader gets so involved in the minute-to-minute tactical details, clearing one room, solving one tiny problem, that they lose sight of the bigger picture, the overall mission. They stop leading and become just another operator,
losing situational awareness. What's the second mistake?
stuck in the back of the train. The opposite problem, the leader's too detached, too far from the front line, and they don't actually know what's happening on the ground. They lose the feel of the operation.
So it's this dynamic balancing act. Close enough to understand, distant enough to command and see the whole field. That requires confidence, surely.
Immense confidence, but crucially, confidence without ego.
Hmm.
A truly confident SEAL leader, according to their doctrine, isn't threatened if someone else steps up.
They're willing to let someone else lead.
Absolutely. If a junior team member has better information or is in a better position to make a call for a specific part of the mission, the designated leader has to have the humility to step back, follow their lead temporarily, and support them.
Putting the mission above their own status or ego.
Always. The mission is the only thing that matters. That willingness to follow is maybe the ultimate sign of leadership confidence and echoes Emerson's hero prioritizing the task over personal standing.
And this idea of the field leader needing autonomy, it resonates strongly with Sun Tzu, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. Sun Tzu, writing thousands of years ago, laid this out as essential for victory.
What was his specific point?
He listed 5 essentials for winning, and one of them is that the general has military capacity and is not interfered with by the sovereign.
The political leader shouldn't meddle in the general's tactical decisions.
Precisely. It's the ultimate division of labor. The sovereign, the political leadership, sets the overall strategy, the why, and the broad what.
But the general decides how and when to fight the battle.
Yes. When the political leadership back home starts trying to direct troop movements or second-guess tactical calls on the battlefield, Sun Tzu saw that as a recipe for disaster.
And you can see that parallel in business easily. The board sets strategy, but micromanaging the CEO or the execution team is usually fatal.
The moment strategic oversight crosses into tactical interference, you inject confusion, undermine the commander on the ground, and violate those principles of stability and clear roles we talked about earlier.
We've talked a lot about external structures and actions, but underpinning all of this is the individual's internal state, their personal agency, especially when things are tough.
Absolutely. And Stephen Covey offers a really powerful frame for this with his concept of love.
He argues love is a verb. What does that mean in this context?
It means love isn't just a feeling that happens to you passively. It's an active choice, an action. It's choosing to sacrifice, to listen, to empathize, to affirm someone, even when you don't feel like it.
So the action comes first and the feeling follows.
That's the idea for proactive, effective people. You act lovingly, and that generates the feeling of love. Rather than waiting passively for the feeling to inspire the action, it's about choosing your response.
And that power to choose your response, even in the most horrific circumstances. That's Viktor Frankl's core message from the concentration camps.
Yes. Frankl's experience at Auschwitz and other camps led him to this profound realization. Even when everything else is stripped away, your possessions, your dignity, control over your body, there is one freedom that can never be taken.
Which is?
The freedom to choose your attitude, your inner response to your circumstances. The SS could control the external conditions, but they couldn't control how prisoners chose to face that suffering.
So you could find meaning, even in that horror.
Frankl argued yes. By choosing how you endured, by maintaining your inner spiritual freedom, you could turn suffering from meaningless torture into a kind of internal achievement, preserving your humanity.
That assertion of agency, even when constrained, reminds me of Frederick Douglass.
Yes. Douglas's experience with hiring his time is a fascinating example of finding agency within an exploitative system.
Explain that arrangement again. He had to pay his enslaver.
Right. He was allowed to go find his own work, but he had to pay his master, I think it was $3 a week, out of his earnings. And his own living expenses were around $6 a week.
So financially, it was a terrible deal. He was paying for the privilege of working himself ragged.
On the surface, yes. It seems absurd. Yet Douglas saw it as a crucial step towards freedom.
Why? What was the value?
Because in his words, it allowed him to bear the responsibilities of a free man. It forced him to practice self-reliance, industry, perseverance, managing his own affairs, even under unfair conditions.
So the real value wasn't the money, it was the practice of acting like a free person, the
Yeah.
exercise of agency.
Exactly. It was building the internal muscle of self-management, cementing his own belief in his capacity for freedom, making the idea of freedom more real and attainable in his own mind. He was acquiring the habits of liberty.
Okay, so we have this power of inner choice, of agency. But going back to leadership and decision-making, what do you do when the truth is murky? When Taleb's noise seems overwhelming?
That brings us back to Cicero, actually, in his discussion of the New Academy philosophers who were skeptics.
They doubted we could know absolute truth.
Right. They maintained that objective certainty might be impossible. But crucially, they didn't conclude that this means you should do nothing.
So skepticism doesn't mean paralysis.
Not at all. Cicero relays their view. When absolute truth is denied, action must be based on probability. You use your reason, that defining human trait, to weigh the evidence.
And you choose the path that seems most likely to be right or successful.
Exactly. You choose the course for which the more and the better reasons can be given. It's the ultimate practical guide for making decisions under uncertainty. You gather the best available, albeit imperfect, information, you analyze it rationally, and you act on the highest probability. You make the best bet you can.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a vast territory. From Aristotle's need for moderation in governance for sheer survival,
To Rousseau's ideal lawmaker and the need for checks like the tribunes. To Cicero's insistence that true expediency is morality.
then Emerson's call for radical self-reliance and being that transparent conduit for truth.
Countered by Taleb's warnings about noise, epiphenomena, and the researcher's free option in our data-drenched world.
We saw how organizations like Pixar institutionalize candor with things like the brain trust, sacrificing hierarchy for honesty.
And how leaders like Dalio use transparency even in uncertainty, while Lencioni emphasizes fixing internal team health first.
Plus the practicalities of OKRs needing top-level modeling, and the SEAL's guidance on balancing tactical involvement with strategic awareness, putting mission before ego.
Sun Tzu reinforcing the need for generals to have autonomy from sovereigns.
And finally, grounding it all in personal agency, Covey's love as a verb, Frankl's inviolable inner freedom, Douglas finding responsibility even in exploitation, and the skeptical philosophers acting on probability.
It's quite a tapestry. But the threads seem clear. Stability needs moderation and structure. Authority needs moral alignment and character. Leadership needs candor and adaptability.
Integrity seems to be the watchword, whether it's personal integrity, intellectual integrity with data, or institutional integrity through transparency and structure.
And that brings us to a final thought, maybe from Thomas Carlyle. He had this belief about humanity's fundamental need for heroes.
Right. He argued that despite all the cynicism or triviality in the world, people will inevitably worship the hero. That loyalty, that reverence for greatness is innate.
He called it an everlasting adamant, like an unbreakable stone that society can always rebuild upon even after everything seems to fall apart. People crave authentic leadership.
Carlyle also made that interesting observation about the printing press making democracy inevitable and turning the press, the media, into effectively a fourth estate, another branch of government, because influence matters.
Whoever commands attention, whoever has a tongue which others will listen to, holds real power. And that seems more true than ever today, with social media amplifying voices instantly.
So here's the final thought to leave you, the listener, with. If Carlyle is right, and a leader's power increasingly stems from public influence, from having that tongue people listen to, what's our protection against the misuse of that power?
especially when, as Caleb warns, it's so easy to mistake noise for signal or a spurious relationship for a true principle. How do we know if we're following real leadership or just skillfully amplified opinion?
You constantly have to ask yourself, is this leader's influence built on the shifting sands of popular opinion and noise? Or is it founded on that immovable bedrock Carlyle talked about, genuine character, moral action, and a commitment to demonstrable truth? That's the critical discernment we all need.